Now to create data, I'm going to add a button right above our list. So a button with a few classes, btn, btn primary, and mb3. Now in a real world application, we also need a form to add a user, but I don't want to spend time building a form here because that's a distraction from what we are focusing on in this lesson. So here we have a button. Next, we set onClick to a function. I'm going to call this add user. Now let's create this function. So add user. Now in this function, again, we're going to use an optimistic update. So we're going to update the UI first, and then we'll call the server to save the changes. So let's create a new user object. Here we set the ID to 0, meaning this user is not saved, and name to, let's say, Mosh. Now in a real world application, the properties of this user object will be based on the values in a form. But we don't have a form here. That's why I've hard-coded these values, okay? So here we have a new user. Next, we call setUsers and pass an array. Here we spread the users array and then add our new user object. We can also put this at the beginning. That's nicer. Now, back to the browser. So if I click add, here's the new user, beautiful. Now we need to call the server to save the changes. So here we call axios.post. Now here we need to pass a URL. So we go back to JSON placeholder and grab the user's endpoint and paste it here. Now we should include our new user in the body of the request. So as a second argument to the post method, we pass our new user object. Now, if the call to the server is successful, we should refresh our list with the saved user because the new user has an ID that is going to be generated on the server. So here we get a response object, and then we call setUsers to. Now, just like before, we pass an array. Here we pass res.data. So the new user object will be included in the body of the response, okay? And again, we should spread the users array. Let's see if this works. So back to the browser, add, we get Mosh. We also have a post request to the server. Let me pull this out so we can see clearly. All right, look, here in the request headers, we have a request to the user's endpoint. The method of this request is post that is used for creating data. Now, in the payload of this request, meaning in the body of this request, we have a user object. And in the body of the response, we have a user object with the ID set to 11. So this ID is generated on the server. Now, one thing you need to know about JSON placeholder is that this is a fake backend. So if we send this request multiple times, every time we get a user with the ID of 11. And that means if we add another user here, we get an error in the console saying encountered 2 children with the same key. So you know that when mapping objects in JSX, we should give each element a unique key. But in this case, we don't have a unique key because the last 2 user objects, both of them have the same ID. So be aware of that. This is just because we have a fake backend. Now, back to our add user function. So we call the server, and if the call is successful, we refresh the list with the saved user. Now, let me show you a different way to write this code to make it a little bit more readable. So because we need to access the data property, we can destructure the response and grab the data property right here. So first we wrap this in parentheses, then we add braces and grab the data property. Now we can simply pass it here. That's better. But what is data? It's not clear. So here we can rename this property by typing a colon to saved user. This is just an alias that we are assigning to this property. So now we can use the saved user object right here. So now our code is more readable, okay? So this is the happy path, but what if we encounter an error? Again, we should show the user an error message and restore our list back to the original state. So here we call catch. We catch the error. First we call setError and pass error.message. Now to restore the list to the original state, just like before, we need to declare a constant called original users. And then here, we simply call setUsers and pass the original users. Now to simulate an error, I put an X here. Now let's add a new user. Okay, we get an error message and our list is restored back to the original state.